Welcome back to the Larson Show. It is a pleasure to be with you on a Monday night. Don't forget, every week we celebrate First Amendment Friday on this program, meaning on Fridays we open up the lines and let you call in on anything. The rest of the week I kind of set the agenda. Of course, naysayers always go first on this program. If you want to join the conversation, it's 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@LarsLarson.com. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the program Ambassador Alexander Vershbow, who is former NATO Deputy Secretary General and also served as the U.S. Ambassador to Russia. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for taking the time tonight.
It's great to be back with you.
So there is talk that President Trump is thinking about lifting sanctions on Russia in preparation for this phone call with President Putin on Saturday. I think a lot of the rest of America is focused on tomorrow night's speech from D.C. But should the president do that?
Well, I hope he doesn't do that. He definitely should not do that because the sanctions were imposed for a very clear reason, because Russia carried out a very naked aggression against Ukraine and next part of Ukraine's sovereign territory. So, I'm looking forward to hearing what happens in this phone call, but I hope it doesn't include lifting of sanctions that were linked to the Ukraine crisis. We can certainly support the president in trying to improve the relationship with Russia, but it shouldn't be at the expense of 45 million Ukrainians who have been suffering from Russian aggression.
How much would Russia have to amend its policies or its practices to make lifting sanctions make sense?
Well, there's a set of agreements which Russia helped negotiate. In fact, it sort of imposed them on Ukraine, which involve a ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weapons, and eventually getting eastern Ukraine, which is now under effective Russian occupation, back into Ukraine as an integral part of the country. Now, this agreement could be implemented in stages, so you could perhaps see the sanctions being lifted gradually in response to concrete moves on the ground. But right now, Russia has been stalling in these negotiations for more than 2 years, and it doesn't seem to want to pull out even one of its soldiers. It even denies that they're there because they have no insignias. It pretends that these are locals, but in fact, a lot of them are Russians. So, things have to change on the ground to justify any lifting of the sanctions.
Well, and in fact, Russia's kind of in a pressure point right now because with the decline in oil prices, they actually saw their GDP drop last year when, Americans usually complain if ours doesn't grow fast enough, and we should. But Russia's seeing a contracting economy, so that puts the country under a lot of pressure, and the sanctions make that worse, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the sanctions by themselves haven't been enough to cause the Russians to reverse course in Ukraine, but the combination of the declining energy price, the sanctions, and bad policy choices by President Putin for many years in failing to open up and diversify his economy, all have conspired to lead to a real stagnation. It's ironic, Ukraine's economy is growing a lot faster than Russia's, even with a war on part of its territory.
Do you believe that President Trump is getting good advice from the people around him about the implications of either leaving the sanctions in place or lifting them?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, there aren't very many people around him because the administration is being painfully slow in staffing up the NSC, the State Department, the Pentagon. Jim Mattis is a great Secretary of Defense, but he doesn't have very many people there working with him.
Is that, by the way, is that more a function of what the Trump administration is not doing or obstruction by Democrats in Congress?
No, it's the administration hasn't even chosen the people. I mean, the confirmation process can be slow, but of course it's a Republican-dominated Senate and House, so I think the confirmations will go reasonably fast. But the leaders have to choose their teams, vet them. There's all kinds of things for the security clearances, and start pushing these people through the Senate confirmation process. Right now, Rex Tillerson and Jim Mattis are basically home alone.
And so, who actually in an administration takes direct charge of that? I mean, there are 4,000 jobs to fill if you total them all up. Is that Chief of Staff Priebus? Is it Strategist Bannon? Is it somebody else?
Well, I think both Mattis and Tillerson want to have the primary say in who serve as their deputies and their assistant secretaries. But the White House, for these political appointments does have a role. There's a whole White House personnel apparatus. I don't know exactly whether Priebus or others are the key players, but I think the problem is they didn't think they were going to win the election, so they were way behind the curve in selecting their teams. And even now, here we are approaching the beginning of March. There's not even good rumors, much less solid leads on who's going to be the Deputy Secretary of State and the Undersecretary for Policy at the Pentagon. Key jobs that Obama had filled within a couple of weeks.
Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you about something that occupied a lot of Press Secretary Spicer's time today, and that was questions about Russia and possible investigations of what's going on there, because he makes it sound as though the leaks that are coming out of the administration that seem calculated to hurt the president are leaks alleging that there were connections between the Trump campaign and Russia, which he says, to hear him tell the story, the FBI and others say, no, none of this is happening. And the New York Times story was based on nothing more than leaks. And yet, if you turn on the news tonight, I'm sure you're going to see a ton of stories that suggest, no. They're still looking into it. And I'm wondering, what you think both about the leaks and about the allegations that there was some kind of communication going on between the Russians and the Trump campaign. Because I keep asking people, where's the substance that this actually happened? And they say, well, the New York Times said it happened. Well, I don't consider that a very good source of information, frankly.
Well, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about this. Some of these stories go back months relating to some figures in the campaign, including the guy who was heading the campaign for a while, Paul Manafort, who has direct and long-standing links to Russia and to former President Yanukovych of Ukraine. He's less central in this whole drama, but
because he's been gone a long time.
Yeah, but he's still seen at Trump Tower. So
yeah,
I think these investigations need to go ahead. Leaks are bad. We should focus on facts and not on anonymous leaks. But on the other hand, you can't have it both ways. If the leak is of genuine information and you're complaining about leaks,
no.
On
Look,
day one, on the other day you say it's fake news.
If it's real data. If it's real data, Ambassador, I want to see it. But on the other hand, I realize the great potential for people who are holdovers from the previous administration to sit there and leak things out that they realize will cause problems, whether the leaks turn out to be true or not. And that's disturbing to me as an American, that you've got people within the government drawing government paychecks who are actively trying to subvert the new administration simply because they disagree with it politically.
Yeah. No, I agree. That kind of partisan leaks should be condemned, but I prefer that this whole thing be dealt with privately. I think, unfortunately, each time the White House has tried to reach out to the FBI and ask them to suppress some story, it ends up creating more suspicions rather than less. So we'd be better off to let the Congress do what it's promised to do, to have the intelligence community investigate the hacking, and other committees do whatever they feel is necessary. And get this out of the media, and let's give the American people some facts. But the real issue, of course, is the administration needs to start laying out its policies on how it's going to deal with Russia going forward. I think then people would be less anxious. There's been so many mixed signals, including on the sanctions that you were asking about. Is Russia a partner against ISIS, or isn't it? More focus on policy and less on these stories from the campaign, I think, would be better for everybody.
Ambassador Vershbow, thank you very, very much. We're glad to have you back. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you on. Back in just a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.